Ultra Spirit Runners. Today is Saturday, the 20th of February, and this is one of our fortnightly videos that we record on the channel. Now, today's topic is a very interesting one, and it's actually quite relevant to the challenges we've been going through as a nation, you know, as a continent, and the nations of the world generally. So I've gone out of my way to find this gentleman who is very high profile, and this has been planned over months. I had to get the right person to talk about this topic because it's been out there in the press, people are talking about it, and you know, you really need an expert in the field to deal with a particular topic effectively. So without wasting much time, I'd like to introduce my dear friend Muyiwa Ogunsalu, who is also, I have to say that first, a fellow runner. So we have he come on. So welcome to Ultra Spirit Runners. Muyiwa, thank you so much for it.
Yeah, thanks for having me as well. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So just to tell you a little bit about Muyiwa, so that you know that he's the right person to actually talk about this topic. I've heard so many other people talk about it on the media, social media, and the news and everything, who are in the medical field, but are not experts in this field. Now, he is an expert in this field, so it's the right person to actually break down everything so that we can make a well-informed decision. So Muyiwa is a microbiologist and a pharmaceutical quality professional who graduated from the University of Lagos in 1986. So in January 1990, he was selected by the UK government to pursue a sponsored master's program in biotechnology at the University of Central Lancashire in Preston. And this was in a bid to ensure that the UK stayed ahead of the game in the biotechnology sector globally. Now, Muyiwa has worked in the pharmaceutical sector since graduation in 1991. All of those years have been in biotechnology, apart from 3 years with a company called GSK. Other organizations he has worked for include the British Biotech PLC, Lonza Biologics, the John Goldman Center for Gene and Cellular Therapy, and Evelo Biosciences. His career spans years working with microbial and mammalian-derived biological products, as well as cell and gene therapy products. His overall experience working as a pharmaceutical quality professional is just under 30 years. So I think he probably does know what he's talking about. His quality control experience comprises over 10 years managing microbiology quality control laboratories and 14 years managing both chemistry and biochemistry quality control laboratories. He's a member of the UK Royal Society of Biology with chartered status and achieved QP eligibility in November 2011 through the permanent provisions of the EC Derivatives 2001/82/EC. He has since been named on several licenses in the UK after he was certified as a qualified person, quality controller, and a responsible person by the MHRA in November 2011. Ayo Ogunsalu joined AGC Biologics on 1st of November 2020 and was recruited as director, qualified person to help with the manufacture and release of the Novavax Covid19 vaccine, which was recently announced as demonstrating 89.3% efficacy against past and new strains of the virus. I think that says it all. We know we have the person in the house to talk about COVID-19. So we're going to have about 3 parts to this interview. because he's going to go into the nitty-gritty and the details about the virus. If you've had any doubts, if you're not sure and you've watched so many videos on social media, this is not one of those videos, because I found that a lot of those videos have been, and I'm not knocking them. Obviously, they mean well, but at the end of the day, you really need an expert to tell you the details about about the virus, because this is what he does. So it's not a general practitioner. It's not a dietitian. He's a microbiologist. And from his profile, which I took the time to read out to you, you know that he knows what he is talking about because he works in the field. So without wasting much time, I'd like to go straight into the questions that I've got lined up for my dear friend, Muyiwa, so that we can all be enlightened about COVID and about the vaccine. So Muyiwa, thank you for your time once again.
No problem.
And yes, so everybody's looking forward to this video, so I'm sure you do justice to the question. So the best place to start off with really is, what is the COVID-19 virus and what are its variants?
Okay, great. So thank you for that. Just listening to you, sometimes I was thinking, is that really me? But I guess, yeah, it's been a while. This is all I do. I mean, I've spoken to a number of people, and this is one of several of these kind of interviews that I've done. So this is what I do. This is all I know. I am a microbiologist, and that is what I've done. So my in terms, just to set the scene, my level of experience with this, I can talk about the virus itself. I can talk about, I work in pharmaceutical manufacture and testing, so I can talk about the manufacture of the drug, the vaccine. I can talk about the clinical trials, because that also covers my remit, and and any other questions that relate to that, and go about to debunk some of the very many sort of fantasies that I have heard. So I am, as you've introduced, a microbiologist. That means I study viruses, bacteria, and fungi. So if I know nothing about anything, I certainly know a little bit about viruses. So the coronavirus, or COVID-19, is caused by a group of viruses which together are called coronavirus. Now, I will try not to go into too much detail so it doesn't become a biology class. I know that those of us who didn't go into sciences were thinking, oh my gosh. In fact, I think a few people did biology because it was the easiest of the lot.
Yeah,
physics.
I was one of them.
Yeah, we kind of just that to the side and did biology. And even that was just a matter of, let's just do it because we have to. So it's very simple. I mean, viruses in themselves, and this is just going back to the basics. Viruses in themselves, I don't know if, for those of you who remember your biology, we used to talk about characteristics of living things. And you may or may not remember, if you studied in Nigeria, we used to have a formula to remember it. The formula was Mr. Niger. So it was movement, reproduction, nutrition, irritability. G was for growth, E was for excretion, and R was for reproduction, or was it respiration? So that was the formula we used to remember. This was going back way back in secondary school. So you remembered Mr. Niger, and you could tell the characteristics of living things. Viruses are kind of funny because they don't exactly meet the criteria of this, what I call Mr. Niger. So as MRNIGER, the 7 characteristics of what we call a living thing. The reason for that is because they're very, very simple. Now, the coronavirus, so you have several types of viruses. We define them based on the type of genetic material that they have. So they either have a DNA, you can have DNA viruses, and you can have RNA viruses. And the coronavirus, which is a group of viruses, is actually an RNA virus. So most viruses, like I said, are very simple in structure. What you tend to have is a genetic material and a coat, which is made of proteins. So you may have heard a lot on the news about the code protein. Typically, a virus has a strand of DNA surrounded by a code protein, and technically, is not actually living. A virus is a parasite, and all they live to do is to infect a cell. They take over the cell's mechanism, and that's what it is. So what happens is, when you have a viral infection, the virus sort of attaches to one of your cells, wherever it is, they're able to gain attachment depending on the nature of the virus. They would secrete their DNA or RNA into your system. Your body would then make copies of that virus, and then they will just continue to cause havoc. Now, a lot of times, it's funny because the body is just an amazing thing in the way it's been made or created. And a lot of times, sometimes the effect that you get in terms of when you have the presence of bacteria or when you have an infection is not actually because the bacteria or the virus is causing damage. It's actually your body trying to get rid of the virus or the infection that causes some of the diseases. And what happens in the situation with COVID is exactly that. So again, some of you may have heard in the various bits of news you've heard, you may have heard of what we call a cytokine rush or it's a cytokine cascade. So what happens is when you have an infection, your body goes into reaction like, okay, we've got an infection here, and just reacts against it. Now, what happens in the case of COVID is your body actually overreacts. Wow. And in the overreaction, it causes damage to itself, which is kind of like this. It's a strange thing. I mean, it's just a really weird thing, and it's counterproductive for the virus, because inevitably, when the person dies, then the virus loses its host. So the virus doesn't actually want to kill you. Most viruses do not want to kill you. They just want to infect you and stay and keep you sort of just happily alive while they themselves maintain. Unfortunately, while your body is fighting the virus, what happens is it overreacts, and in that overreaction, it causes all the symptoms that we get. So in effect, your body goes into an inflammatory mode. You get what is called a cytokine storm. Now, the detail, if I go into the detail, it might get a bit too complicated. But just if anybody can go and Google it, just go and Google cytokine storm. It's spelled CYTOKINE, storm. And it's just a sequence of events. It's a cascading event where how your body sort of activates itself to defend it against infection. Now, not just viruses, it could be bacteria, it could be fungal infection. Now, what happens in this case is your body overreacts. It's a bit like cancer. What happens with cancer is your body naturally replenishes itself. So when your cells die, your body is constantly replenishing. What happens with cancer is the cells just continue growing and they go out of control, and you end up with a cancerous cell. I mean, that's very simplistic, but so in a sense, it's something similar. Your body's overreacting because the virus is present. Your body's going, oh my gosh, I don't like this. And it's the easiest, in fact, because I like when I talk to people and they'll tell, even at work, I do this. I like to explain things very simply so that people can understand. So I apologize for anybody who is maybe scientific, who's thinking, gosh, that's very patronizing. It's not, my intention is not to be patronizing, but it's just to help people understand. The easiest way to describe what's going on in your body is like if you have a tiny mosquito, look, let's say an ant that has sort of come into your house and you're trying to kill the ant. Now, you could easily just squash it with your finger. It's a tiny little ant. But what's happening is your body has decided to take the fridge and smash it against the little ant. It's probably the easiest. It's like a huge overreaction. Yes. So because in smashing, if you take your fridge and smash it against an ant, the chances are that you damage your floor as well.
Of course.
And that in effect is what's happening. Maybe the easiest way to explain it. So yeah, so that's the COVID, so the disease. But the virus itself is an RNA virus. It's not unique in itself. So it's not a new virus that suddenly just appeared. I mean, the full range, and I wrote some things down so I don't get it wrong at all, just to be sure. But the full range, I mean, it normally causes diseases in birds and to a degree in humans, because it can cause disease in mammals, and of course we're mammals as well. But they typically also they're closely related to the virus that causes the common cold, and that's significant. I made a note of that just because of the fact that in going further on, I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. So I'm just going to look a little bit. So the viruses so just look at my notes. So it says, so most of them, they cause respiratory tract infection. So basically the infection, you inhale them, they get settled within the respiratory system, and they cause disease. So a lot of them also, they're kind of related to the viruses that cause the cold. The more lethal, they actually have a number of varieties. So you have the SARS, which happened. We had the SARS infection some time back, which was this whole bird flu. You have the MERS, and then of course there's COVID. And COVID-19 really is just because of the fact that it came up in 2019 was when we first discovered it. So again, it's not a peculiar name. It's just named like that because of the year that it was actually first noticed as an effective agent. But just in a very brief sort of summary, the coronavirus itself is an RNA virus. So basically that means it's got a strand of RNA, it's surrounded by a coat protein. So you'll have seen those sort of fancy pictures on TV where you have this circular thing with some red balls sticking out. Yes, that's quite so. So that's the actual coat of protein. Within that coat is a strand of RNA, and that's it. When it infects you, what happens is it gets into the respiratory system. It attaches to what we call receptors. Now, I'm going into that detail just because we'll talk about the vaccine later on. It attaches to what we call receptors. So each of those little spikes you would see on that picture that you see on the BBC or wherever you see it, they look for specific. If you imagine Lego, that's how it works. So it looks for receptors, and if it matches, it stays. And once it stays, that's it. It attaches to your cell. When it attaches to the cell, then the coat protein disintegrates, and the genetic material goes into your cell, and that's it. That cell has been taken over. So now what it now does is it integrates that RNA. Well, in this case, it doesn't integrate because it's an RNA virus. So what it does, it goes through a process of translation. And what happens then is that your body starts to reproduce the virus. And all the virus has in that genetic information is just information to make more of itself. So your body starts to make more of itself. And when there's lots of viruses in your cell, then it damages that cell, but they just go into the next cell and the same thing. So you just end up with a recurrent infection. In all this time, your body is fighting. You end up in this, what I call a cytokine storm, because your body is like really overreacting, and then you end up with the disease. So the virus in itself is not causing the disease. It's the presence of the virus and your body's reaction to that virus that is causing the disease.
Wow.
So I hope that explains it in as best a way as possible.
Absolutely brilliant. I've never heard it described like that before, and I'm so glad I am the one doing this interview because I'm the first person getting educated about this. And I love the way that you've explained it and you've answered this question because you've answered it in layman terms so that we can understand without it losing its meaning, you know, the meaning of what you're trying to pass across, you know, message you're trying to pass across, which is describing the virus. So thank you so much for that. That's really, really great. So you've heard from the experts now. If you didn't know what COVID-19 was, or you didn't understand the variants and everything, you've just got your answer. So thank you so much for that. So I'm going to move on quickly to the next question, which is it real? Is COVID real? Because I've heard people say things that, oh, it's all propaganda. It's the government that is just trying different things, and that it's not really real, doesn't exist, and it's all a hoax and everything. So my question is it real, or is it that it's just been blown out of proportion by the government? Is it a real thing? Is it is this some sinister plan of the government to get everybody to be indoors so that they can do stuff outdoors without anybody seeing what they're doing? You know, I mean, can you just shed a bit more light on it? Because some people, you know, have those views, and we just want to find out from you. What do you think?
Right. Great. Yeah, no problems. Yeah, thank you. So so that's a very interesting one. It's one of those theories that I find astounding, and sometimes I use that in the first example, and I will do a lot of this. People at work will tell you I am very good at breaking things down, and I try to use analogies that's very common and simple. So first of all, but just going into the science first of, is this real? When there's an infection like this, or what we call a pandemic, we look for what we call cause and effect. That's very simple. Mm-hmm. If you go into a place and you find you come into your house and your house has been broken into, you know, there's a lot of damage in your house. Mm-hmm. And you kind of look around your house, looking at what's different. And in the corner, you see 3 guys with a hammer, hooded, and they're not really supposed to be in your house. And they're carrying a hammer where you can see signs of damage on that hammer because they've smashed into your wardrobe, and they've got a sack full of your property. You do a sort of cause and effect. You think, well, okay, I can see damage in my property. I can see these 3 guys who don't belong here. They've got a hammer. It looks like this might be the reason why something has happened. But you decide, okay, just to be on the safe side, you suddenly hear your neighbor screaming and shouting as well. Like, oh my gosh, I've got, some damage in my house. So you go to that other house and you see the same thing. Damage in the house. You see 3 guys with a hammer, hooded, with a sack, with property. And it happens in the next house as well. We call that cause and effect. So by that stage, you're pretty clear that what has happened in your house was caused by these 3 guys. Because the other houses around who never called for it. You went into those houses and you didn't see the guys there. There was nothing. Nothing had happened in their house. So very clearly, that's a very simple explanation, but you can look at it and think, well, okay, if those things are always present when this happens, then you can almost deduce that that's the cause of this effect.
Yeah.
So So in the same thing too with this virus, I know that people have gone on about, or they don't think it's real. The truth of the matter is, for everyone who's been declared ill and has died of what we call the COVID virus or the COVID disease, they have gone in. So virologists would have gone in, taken a sample. It's standard certainly in the developed countries. You would take a part of that person who has died, or the cause of that. So if you notice that, okay, there was some sort of respiratory infection, you would take a sample of that, send it to the laboratory, and you would analyze to find out what was the cause of death. Now, if you examine several cells and you notice a virus present, you would think, you know what, this is probably what has happened, and then you try and trace the type of virus it is and understand where it comes from. So actually, my very first job, I worked in a pathology lab, and that's actually what I did. So this was actually during my national service in Nigeria. I worked in the General Hospital in Katsina and in the pathology lab, and I had two responsibilities. One was when we did postmortems, you took sample and I analyzed it for any microbial contamination. And of course, when people had infection and they were actually alive, so if you have sexually transmitted diseases or whatever, you will take a sample, you will look for any predominant bacteria or whatever causes it. So and then you'd be able to make a determination that this is what caused the disease. So in the same way too, for everyone who has died, they have taken samples of the whole respiratory area. These have been analyzed before a conclusion is made. So I haven't been in those labs, so I haven't tested that. So I can't tell you that, oh yes, I saw them with my eyes under the electron microscope. But here's the question. So moving away from the science and just coming to what you might call the conspiracy, because I try and want to deal with both, because it's all conspiracies that causes people anxiety. Yes. Here's my question. What is any government? Let's look at what the virus has done. Take the UK, for example, because that's what I know. So in the UK, the government has had to pay for 80% of people's salary, all the people who are furloughed. We have pretty much stopped the world economy. And the question is for what? What, for some hoax? Like, what I want to ask you, what is the government actually gaining? What's the government standing to? Let's come down to home and look at someone like Boris Johnson. He's just coming to power. You want to do all the fancy things. You promise people. No government is going to want to come in, and the first thing you're fighting is some fake infection. And actually, you will get agreement not just from the UK government. You'll get agreement with all of Europe, all of the United States, the rest of the world. Like, yes, let's just pretend that there's a virus that does not exist, and we're just going to infect our people so that they can all go indoors while we do something really sinister. Like, what exactly what sinister thing does the government want to do? And to be honest, there are multiple ways they can do that. If the government wants to stop, for example, if you want to bring London to a standstill, you just crash all the traffic lights and stop the tube from running. And quite frankly, London will stop. Mm-hmm. And you just say, you wouldn't. Why would you infect people? Because I can't understand why people actually think that it's manufactured. I think.
I think some of the theories that I've heard as things like, well, there's a sinister plan between the government and the pharmaceutical companies. They're all big boys. They want to make, obviously, if they say there's a virus that doesn't exist and people are dying, all these big pharmaceutical companies will have to create a vaccine and they will make money, and then the government can make money off them. That's one. And then people have come up with theories like, well, population has always been a problem, and one of the best ways you can control population is to, well, I've heard, is it herd immunity or something, where they kill, maybe that's not the right term, I'm not sure. Yeah. I heard someone use that term. Yeah, so they basically kill a lot of people off. I don't agree to all of this. I'm just repeating what people have said to my ears. You kill them off, and that way you can bring the population down, and then you don't have a lot of people struggling for few resources. So that way the government is not under too much pressure to provide for the few people that are left. So those are some of the theories, some of the things I've heard, about this. So I just thought I should just throw them out to you so that you
No, yeah, and it's funny. I mean, I was doing one of these shows, and somebody asked a question which was even more ridiculous, and I ended up laughing, and someone they took offense to that because they thought I wasn't taking it seriously. And so if I laugh, it's not because I'm not taking it seriously. It's just because it's too much. A lot of what we're saying is fantasies born out of having watched too much TV or movies, because it's just not going to happen. And a simple question is this: so when you've watched, let's just say you've watched conspiracy theory, and the government wants to get rid of people. Yeah, the government actually said, we want to get rid of people. Would Boris Johnson be part of the people? He got COVID. We saw pictures live on TV.
Yeah.
Donald Trump got COVID. We saw pictures where he went. So what? You're telling me that these world leaders want to reduce the population, but they decided, they would also eradicate themselves? That's just not going to happen. I mean, that's not. You don't even need science to explain that. That's just a very simple, logical step. And the thing about this is, it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a scattergun approach. It's not very specific. If you were looking at getting rid of people, you might say, okay, you know what? Let's get rid of all the people who are vulnerable, who don't contribute to society. You would target it so that you just get rid of the old and vulnerable. But that's not what's happening. COVID is affecting everybody.
Everybody.
So
absolutely.
so it's just not true.
Yeah. Excellent. I like the way that we've gone into some of these conspiracy theories that we've heard out there, and you don't even need the science to confirm that they're just theories. There's no evidence to confirm any of them, and when you think about it logically, a lot of them the hands don't tie up properly. So there's a lot of question mark on them. So I'm going to move very quickly to the next last question for this part of this series on COVID-19. And it is, how does the virus spread? In just a few words, how does the virus spread?
Okay, so if you remember when I was talking about the virus, I talked about it being a very close relation to the cold virus, and it pretty much spreads like that. So it spreads in what we call droplets. So when you speak, when you cough, when you sneeze, when you generate what we call droplets from the sort of respiratory tract area where the virus resides, that's how it spreads. Crucially, however, most of these viruses, like I said, viruses are parasites and they need another living cell to exist. What happens with this virus is it appears to be able to survive outside the body or outside the host for a length of time. Now, people have said anything from 24 hours to 5 hours to 9 hours. It's not. We're talking about a virus and a code protein. Sorry, a strand of DNA and a code protein. Its ability to survive is very limited. So, in terms of how you catch it, it's very simple. If you think about how you catch a cold, that's how you catch corona. So, we've got the reason why they've gone to the extremes of restricting the handshakes and telling people to wash their hands is simply because of the fact that you might sneeze. And because this is the thing, this part of the year I don't very much like. As a microbiologist, it messes with my brain because I know a lot of people do that and they sneeze into their hands and they just do that, before coronavirus and alcohol. And then, oh, hi, how are you doing? And they're shaking your hand. And in my head, I'm thinking, I bet they sneeze into their hand. And so typically, as soon as I do that, I shake people's hands in the wintertime, I instantly look for the nearest thing to wash my hands. Maybe I'm slightly OTT, but that's what I've done. In fact, when all this corona thing came and they were talking, the recommendation was people should wash their hands. My kids were like, Dad, don't they wash their hands before? Because my kids, by the time they were young, they were washing their hands and had alcohol gel in their bags. It was just standard. In fact, when all this started and we were looking for alcohol, my son, who had been at university, he had, his last year of university, he dropped his bag and had never been to that bag. We looked in that bag and found 3 alcohol gel packs. It was great because we bought that before it became the staple. So it spreads like that. And if you think about, like when you go and visit a relative and they've got a cold and they say, oh, I've got a cold, don't come near me. It's pretty much like that. So you wouldn't, if they've sneezed in the room, they've generated lots of air droplets, you can take that in. You can't catch it by what you eat. So if they sneeze into the food, because the reason for that is simply because the virus has to attach within your respiratory system. In your digestive system, in your stomach is extremely acidic. So what happens there is that if you did, for any reason, ingest the virus and it goes into your tummy, the acid in there would kill it. So it's not you can't catch it from what you've eaten. So I'm not saying if people sneeze in your food, you still eat it anyway. I'm just simply saying that, you can't catch it that way. It has to be inhalation. So it's either because someone coughs and you take it in, or I suppose you kiss someone. But the hand-to-hand, the contact bit is simply because they don't want people, because there's no actual definitive knowledge of how long it survives outside the body. The idea is because people can touch hands, and that's why they say, well, even if you with your hands, try not to touch your eyes or your mouth. I wouldn't say so much your mouth, but it's try not to touch your eyes or areas where you can get the virus to a point where it can then go into the areas where it can cause you damage. So think about the common cold, and that's probably the best way to avoid getting it. It's just slightly more deadly than the common cold because it just kills that much quicker than the common cold.
Excellent. Thank you so much for breaking this down in layman's terms to our guests and our viewers. I am a lot more enlightened now than before this interview about COVID-19. I'm so grateful to you. I've never heard anyone explain it in this way. So I feel more equipped to be able to, to deal with it now because of all that you've said. And this is just the first part. We've got 3 other parts coming. So, so thank you so much, Aya, for the time you spent with us. Everyone, like I always say, the goal of this channel is to educate us about health and fitness. And COVID-19 is something that's affected the whole world in terms of health and fitness. Lots of people have died. We're going to be delving into other areas that will highlight even more things about COVID and how it connects to our health and fitness as well, which I feel is so important. But at least we're equipped. We now know this is the introductory part of this series of what COVID is. So thank you so much, Aya, for your time. Viewers, please don't forget what I always say. Don't forget to click on the subscribe button to subscribe to this channel. There's a lot more coming. I've got a lot of other guests lined up and to talk about so many other different areas that are so important, so practical and deal with your everyday life. So please subscribe, send the link to the video to friends and family, spread the word, and keep on coming back for more. Thank you so much for the time you spent viewing this interview. Do not forget what I always say is you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. So get out there and get active. One thing the government has not put a ban on is exercise, and the reason why is because they know it is so important. So you've got no excuse. Either get out there, or if you don't want to go out, you can do aerobics, Zumba. Just stay active and keep on moving. God bless you all, and see you in our next video. God bless you all. Thank you so much, Ayo, and see you in the next video.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.